Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Eberlein. I'm the VP of Marketing at SōRSE Technology. Thank you for joining us today for a webinar, Introduction to CBD and Water-Soluble Emulsion Technology. We're really excited to be here at BevNET and NOSH virtually live. And while our clients' products are powered by SōRSE, SōRSE itself is very much powered by its people. And today I have the pleasure of presenting with our VP of Technical Business Development, Michael Flemmens. Michael has worked on a patented new cancer treatment, had a Type 4 drug master file approved by the FDA, and received a JEFCA approval for a new food ingredient. But today, all we really care about is one thing. He's the guy with his team and R&D of over 30 employees that put CBD in your product. A couple things before we get started here. We are going to do a live demo with Michael as well, but to be most efficient with time and make sure we cover everything, if you could start submitting your questions now, we'll hold those to the end, and with the remaining time at the end of the presentation, we will begin answering your questions. Whichever ones we don't get to at the end of the presentation, we will follow up with you directly. On that note, Michael, take it away.
Well, good morning or good afternoon or wherever your time frame are. Today we're going to cover a lot of ground on two main topics: an introduction to CBD and a little introduction to water-soluble emulsion technologies. Our intent is to do as much of a deep dive as we can in the time afforded. So as Diana mentioned, please start asking questions now and as we go through the presentation. A little bit about me, and Diana, thank you for the intro. SōRSE Technology, just to be clear, SōRSE Technology is a delivery system for functional ingredients. That's how we position ourselves. Today, the topic is CBD. In any cases, it could be flavors, it could be adaptogens, it could be anything that has a negative sensory attribute or water solubility issues. But why are we all here today talking about CBD? Well, it's pretty simple. If you look at the market projections, the growth potential is absolutely phenomenal and outstanding. There aren't too many emerging markets today that have this type of potential and far-reaching potential. So obviously, it's a very attractive market for new businesses. Specifically, CBD beverages are super hot in the market right now. It's easy. It's a form factor that most people are used to. It's something you can grab and go. There's a bit of a stigma that, not to knock oil tinctures, but if you want to take a dose in the middle of the day, is it much more socially correct at the office to drink a can of beverage or pop open an oil and drop it into your mouth? Some people just have a stigma associated with it. So this makes it really easy to get products in people's hands and roll it out to the mass market. But what is CBD? Here's the molecule. It's manufactured by the plant, the hemp plant or the marijuana plant. And it's been around for quite a long, long time. 12,000 BCE is the first postulated domestication. But the hemp plant, through very circuitous routes and different applications, has migrated across the globe, whether it's for eating the protein seeds as a food source, to using the fibers to make rope, or hemp. The Declaration of Independence was actually drafted on a piece of hemp paper. So interestingly enough, it's been all over the globe. But how do we come today? The Farm Bill of 2018 introduced hemp, or descheduled hemp, as a Schedule I product, as long as the THC content is less than 0.3%. And then, unfortunately, it's kind of like a hot potato. We're all in the food and beverage industry are patiently and not so patiently waiting for the FDA to give us some guidance on what they're going to do or how they're going to treat it. But I don't know how much advance warning the FDA was given by the Senate when they approved the Farm Bill, but it was essentially a hot potato. So we have to be a little bit patient for them. It's a bit of a muck and a mire to try and figure out all these different regulations. The biggest consideration that we must keep in mind, and regardless of how much CBD has been in the news and how much information and education SōRSE or every other company in the CBD space is doing, we still get asked 3 or 4 times a week, is taking CBD going to get me high? And is it going to make me fail a drug test? Well, likely no. The only caveat is if you take a full spectrum that has an illegal amount, a non-compliant amount of THC in it, that's a possibility. But for all other intents and purposes, you don't have to worry about it. So what are these cannabinoids that we're talking about? There are specific compounds secreted by the cannabis plant, the cannabis flower. They tend to concentrate in the flower, but are found all throughout the plant. Everyone is mostly familiar with the two big two, which is CBD and THC, but there are estimated to be 110 cannabinoids out there. These cannabinoids interact on the endocannabinoid system. What's really interesting is that CBD endocannabinoids are not new. You know, your body actually produces endocannabinoid, endogenous cannabinoids on a routine basis. So there's already a mechanism in place in your body to regulate use and uptake of these cannabinoids. You're just introducing them to the body instead of relying on the body to make their own. It is perhaps one of the most new and important physiological systems that we can find. It tends to promote stasis. So whether it's inflammation or anxiety or sleeplessness, there's so many metabolic functions that are regulated by the endocannabinoid system. So how do we get from there to here? Product developers across the board are trying to integrate CBD into various applications, whether food or beverage or topicals or tinctures. The challenge is that CBD presents as an oil. If it's isolate, it presents as a crystalline material. If it's full or broad, it tends to present as a resinous paste or oil. It's really challenging to work with. It's easier if you're already building an oil system, but there's not a lot of total oil systems on the market. Most people want to have a beverage or some compound, like some product like that. So we have to address the concerns. So what are the product development challenges associated with using CBD or other associated cannabinoids? First and foremost, it's sensory. It does present a weedy flavor and aroma. It is not necessarily always appealing to all of the consumer marketplace. Some people want a very gently flavored system. They want the flavors to shine through and not the flavor of the CBD. So mitigating that sensory challenge is first and foremost on the product developer's plate. One of the biggest challenges is dosage control. While if you're using stevia in a product and you're off by 5 micrograms of stevia, most consumers are not going to notice the change in sweetness level. Unfortunately, if you're making a label claim that says that there's 20 milligrams in my can and you're off by 5 milligrams, that potentially is a big deal. So when you're dealing with an incredibly concentrated material and using it at incredibly low usage rates, the chances of you making a miscalculation or a processing error well within the standard sense of normal variation could potentially cause you some nightmarish headaches, maybe some potential recall. The other challenge is reliable and repeatable onset and duration. So what do we mean by onset? That's the time it takes for the material to enter your body and your body can work on that system. Anyone who's ever had a bad experience with a fish oil tablet and taken a fish oil tablet and then an hour or two later burped it back up, maybe after a big meal, you know that that oil is sitting on top of your stomach contents and not being in a position where the body can work on it. So that's one of the challenges specifically with oil systems is they tend not to play well inside of your intestinal tract. So we need to present the CBD oils to the body in a way that allows them to uptake the materials. Manufacturing is a big challenge. I know that there's folks that are just getting into the space that maybe not have the requisite experience in the food space, but manufacturing supplements and or food products is challenging from a regulatory perspective. You know, CGMP regulations, do you have a HACCP plan? Do you have a toxin sludge statements? You know, there's so many factors that are pretty well understood by the food companies, the big food companies as a whole. But as you get into the business, these may not be things that you're incredibly familiar with. Labeling is a big issue. Do you label? How do you label it? What do you put on your label claims? All things that needed to get sorted out. And to some degree, we're waiting on the FDA for some guidance. Another interesting sort of paradigm shift is we're seeing a lot of natural plant extracts, theoretically the most efficacious, the most broad delivery system for all the materials inside the plant, versus these boutique designer systems where you're increasing the CBN content or the CBV content of a specific product to elucidate a therapeutic stream. And then natural synthetics. So is it a natural plant extract? Is it a synthesized material? Also becoming an interesting paradigm query for the FDA. So when we talk about nomenclature, there's so many times that we see there's people will use the same terminology to describe essentially different compounds. In full disclosure, this was put out by the NSF. The product eligibility link is at the bottom. But we really at SōRSE, we really believe that way that they've presented this nomenclature is probably the most thorough and the most correct that we've seen to date. So you start off with crude and full. As you work your way down to isolate, each one of those materials has a different criteria by which, whether it's a processing step or remediation step. You'll also notice that the top has the fullest sensory and the isolate materials have the lowest sensories. So you have to make a decision on where you want to play within the realm of completion of plant extracts, the fullest rounded out, most extract that you can get versus the sensory impact that you want to have. We see oftentimes many people will use full and broad spectrum to describe the same product. In our minds, it's not, but we do see a lot of confusion in the marketplace. So it's just one thing we hope the industry as a whole can come to some understanding of what the proper nomenclature and what the proper descriptors are. Essentially, for the lay people that are just getting into the space, full spectrum is terpenes, CBD, THC, flavonoids, everything that came out of the plant. It does elucidate the entourage effect. You do get all the essential vitamins. As you go into broad, most people have remediated the THC. You still, that persistence of the flavor and aroma compounds is still there. And as you go to isolate, it's essentially CBD only very small concentrations of other materials. Terpenes are also a huge deal. They're putting, they generate a lot of the flavor and aroma characteristics. The CBD isolate by itself is not a incredibly robust flavor. It doesn't have a huge sensory. So a lot of the sensory is coming from these terpenes, all with some level of therapeutic value. At least the cannabis industry thinks that there's some level of therapeutic value, and the medical industry is also thinking there's therapeutic value. Unfortunately, the FDA has been told that there is zero therapeutic value for all these terpenes. So that's also an interesting legal decision the FDA is going to have to make. And then you combine it all, you get the cannabis, you get your terpenes and flavonoids, you get this whole entourage effect. There are studies trying to determine what are the appropriate levels before the entourage effect really kicks in and is maximum. That work is still pending in TBD, but it looks like the requirement for a huge amount of materials is not necessarily required. How do we turn some of these oils and crystalline forms of cannabinoids into water-soluble platforms? Most people are familiar with oil and water don't mix, so how do we drag them in? And there are essentially four main categories We have physical and mechanical dispersions, ultrasonic dispersions, co-solvents, and your standard tried and true traditional emulsions. And somewhere in the means, there's combinations of 2 or 3 approaches. But for all intents and purposes, those are the main buckets that water solubility turns into. So what do we talk about when we say physical and mechanical dispersions? These are analogous to your Italian salad dressing. If you've ever had Italian salad dressing and you've taken it home, it separates into the oil phase and the vinegar phase. You go to use it, you shake it up, and you pour it over your salad. You've just made a physical dispersion of the oil into the vinegar phase. You also know that it's not incredibly stable, and it almost instantaneously starts falling apart because there's no mechanism to keep that in place. You also, if you use this approach, while it is incredibly cheap and it's very fast, you do get a lot of persistence of the flavor and aroma, and you get a high degree of uniformity. So it's not necessarily probably the best approach for a food and beverage product. Ultrasonic dispersions, they're very big in the marketplace right now. They do produce incredibly small droplets, which can give you the appearance of a translucent or transparent material in solution. They many times require a low molecular weight surfactant that has bearing on whether or not you're going to be able to make label claims, certain label claims like natural, all natural, organic. There are certain options, but they're more limited in the space. One of the things that we like to point out is there's some concern that some of these incredibly small droplets do pose some safety risks. They're traditionally used in the pharmaceutical industry for delivery of platforms because they do tend to increase bioavailability, but that comes at a challenge that certain droplet sizes below 300 nanometers have been reported in the research and literature that those materials can be directly uptaken by the cells. Now, is this a mechanism that we want the CBD inside of our cells? And there's no CB1 receptors or CB2 receptors in our cells. Do we want material aggregating in our cells? We don't know, and I haven't seen a ton of research that says that this is a thing to worry about or not worry about. Many times in the pharmaceutical world, the toxicity associated with cell uptake by these small droplets is more acutely associated with the surfactants or the emulsifiers used, not necessarily the compounds itself. So it's an interesting point. And then you get a little bit further down the road, and anything less than 80 nanometers, these particles can directly be uptaken by the cell nuclei. So that becomes a really interesting safety challenge. You don't want the nuclei as the center for the cell. We don't want materials in there messing up anything, and it may not, but we still need to do the work to prove. Co-solvents, that's an approach where you take a material that has a lipophilic head and a hydrophilic tail, perhaps, and you use that material to drag compounds into a water phase. It does provide good solubility and uniformity. There are some potential label claims, again, materials of choice, hard pressed to say sometimes that everything is 100% organic if that's a desire. And these materials are prone to scalping. If you're not incredibly familiar with scalping, it's a pretty big and well understood phenomenon in the world of beverages associated with production of beverages in aluminum cans. So the aluminum cans have a chemical liner that's applied to the material, and it's applied so that the low pH beverages that we typically are used to consuming, sodas, the low pH beverages would normally eat their way directly out of an aluminum can. So in order to evolve dissolving aluminum into your beverage and having the beverage spill out on the floor, the big can manufacturers apply a coating. Prior to a few years ago, BPA was used as a cross-linking agent to drive the can liner coatings. It has a really high cross-link density, it's very efficient cross-linker. Unfortunately, it carries with it some very bad health and safety concerns. So the can lining companies have removed, for the most part, BPA from their offerings. The challenge is now you have a less efficient crosslinkers that are used, and you have more reactive sites. These reactive sites, unfortunately, have a huge affinity for all the compounds and molecules that we in the beverage space like. So the hop oils, the terpenes from the hops in beer, go to the reactive sites. So that's a problem for the beer industry. The soda manufacturers, all of their flavor compounds, their terpenes, their oils they use in the flavor systems go to the reactive sites. So there's flavor loss over time for sodas, mostly driven by the scalping effect. The cannabis industry is the same thing. These compounds, the cannabinoids and some of the associated terpenes, have an affinity for the can liner. So how do you deal with it? How do you adjust for it? Is there a specific liner that's better than other? There's a lot of work going on in the background to help alleviate the scalping. Not a huge deal in the beer and soda industry, other than your soda doesn't taste as good or your beer doesn't taste as fresh. Challenging from the cannabis industry when we have to make label claims. Coca-Cola doesn't assume that there's 5 milligrams of flavor in your beverage. They just put flavor in. But we like to make label claims. And when it gets tested, whether it's through some lawyer looking for a class action or you trying to prove that you have a stable product and your consumers getting what they paid for, it's an interesting challenge. The last solution to water solubility are your standard traditional emulsions, whether it's a micellular structure or a liposomal structure. This essentially creates a physical ordering where you have an entrapment of the compounds, the cannabinoids and terpenes inside of a shell. The best way to describe this is the cannabinoids, the terpenes, the oils of interest are essentially the chocolate inside the M&M, and the emulsion technique and approach is to create that candy coating shell around the chocolate. It does protect the oils from oxidation. It does help manage and mitigate to some level the scalping that occurs. It does help reduce the sensory effect. One of the negatives is that these structures, these materials tend to be orders of magnitude larger than your ultrasonic dispersions. So they tend to present in more of a hazy appearance. You can adjust the particle size to some degree, but not always. And what's nice about these products is you can, in many cases, meet your all-natural, kosher, organic label claims if that's something you desire. When you go look at emulsions, regardless of what the mechanism is or the type that they are, there's a couple of uniform things that you really want to pay attention to. And that's, you want consistent particle size. If the material, regardless of what the starting particle size is, if it can't maintain that particle size through the life of the product, you're going to have challenges, because as materials aggregate or flocculate or sediment, they're going to change the perception of flavor. They're going to change your ability to get a good assay value. So it's incredibly important that you have a system that is able to be stable and robust regardless of the particle size. Ideally, you'd want 12 months. If you pay attention to the beer and soda industry, like not all of their products have 12-month shelf life because of the scalping and the degradation of some of the materials. But ideally, you'd like as much shelf life as possible. Sometimes you will have to balance the density. If you're not familiar, oils are less dense than water, which is why they float. So how do you change the density of the oil phase to make it more homogeneous within the water column? That's a subject of a completely different talk, but it's an important attribute to consider. And then your accurate dosing, like can you add this material? If it's too concentrated, it does become problematic to dose and is subject to a lot of variation. And if you ever haven't seen emulsions go bad, there's certain phenomenons, creaming, rigging, sedimentation. These are all classic examples of how emulsions fail in the system. So touching on the opacity issue again, like there are a number of different approaches, processes, formulations, process steps that you can use to adjust. So we like to tell people when we do demos, we always use a really hazy product because it's so visually powerful for people to be able to see how uniform the product is. If I was to add water into water, you would never be able to see that addition. So if I add a clear to water, no one will be able to tell that it's in there. That's also one of the challenges with an incredibly clear system is it's very hard without a lot of analytical techniques to show that your product is stable. It may have wrung out, it may have all gone to the bottom, it may be stuck to the sides. No one knows because everything's clear. There is some advantage to having some level of materials in there. SōRSE can create emulsions at any level of transparency, a number of different formulation options, a number of different process techniques, all carry with it to some degree a level of, if you say it has to be 100% organic and kosher, then I have a limited window. If you say I'll take anything, I don't care about my label claims, then Katie, bar the door, you just tell us what you want. The formulation options become wide open. So getting a Scosche commercial onto SōRSE, why would folks choose to gravitate SōRSE? Safe ingredients, homogeneity in the materials that are delivered, also homogeneity in the materials that you produce. Both critical attributes. We have products that have been on real-time stability data for 24 plus months. That doesn't necessarily translate to all materials, all products, all the time, but it does show the power that there are certain beverages that we have that have been stable for over 2 years. Near perfect dosing. So we've worked really long and hard to come up with what we think is the optimal concentration or range of concentrations based on production methods, whether it's addition to a bright tank or a bleed and feed system. There's a number of different dosages that tend to perform better in different systems. And again, we have the ability to control that setup. Improved sensory. While there is a fraction of the industry that truly loves the full weedy taste of CBD and other cannabinoids, it's not necessarily the lion's share of the market. Most of you are familiar with kombucha. It's a very polarizing material, and some people really don't care how good it is for you. They just can't get past the taste. So there are some marketing challenges when you're trying to reach the mass market of how much like the cannabis plant does this beverage or product taste. Repeatable onset, that's another condition. We've done studies in the past looking at the blood plasma levels of folks that have ingested various sorts of products at various intervals in time. And we can show that there are some advantages and many advantages to having a product that the body can rapidly absorb. I always equate it to, if you hurt your ankle and you want relief, you take your Advil. You may not want to wait 2 hours for the Advil to kick in. You want to know that when you take your Advil, probably within the first 20 minutes or so, it's starting to work and you feel better. You don't want to go, well, sometimes it takes 20 minutes and sometimes it takes an hour and sometimes it takes 2 hours. That's what happens when you present the body a lot of times with an oil phase. You'll see the effects will be varied. Seamless integration. This is one of the most compelling reasons for our producers. This is essentially as easy as walk up to your bright tank and dump in a bucket and away you go. You've got a beverage. We'll do a little bit of a live demo and you'll see how fast this works. And it doesn't matter what the format is, the form or function, it all is seamlessly integrated into most manufacturing processes. You don't need to add new equipment. You don't have to buy new bright tanks, no new elaborate systems. We'll find a way to pigeon it in. And then there's a huge focus on quality and food safety. We have our own internal programs. We still independently vet through third-party testing all the time. And the material is incredibly scalable, whether you're developing a a new platform from scratch. We can convert as little as 50 milliliters of product. We can make as much as 5,000 gallons of product. We have capacity anywhere in between. This is the applications, the products that SōRSE manufactures. We don't manufacture a liquid, we manufacture lots of liquids. Lots of different platforms, lots of different, whether you want a kosher version or a non-kosher version, whether you want a hazy version or a less hazy version. But for the lion's share, most of the liquid products are intended for RTD beverages. It's just a really easy format to work with. Standard powder is a spray dried powder. We actually take the beverage grade emulsion and spray dry it into a powder. So when it rehydrates, it forms another beverage grade emulsion. These find a lot of use in baked goods, soft baked goods like cookies, marshmallows, breads. But where it's also incredibly powerful is if you've never tried CBD ice cream, you can throw the powder in CBD ice cream and it's pretty darn good. A lot of the focus for CBD is health and wellness, right? So there are a lot of platforms that the powder works incredibly well in, whether you're making guac or hummus or a crema or any sort of dip to go along with your healthy keto chips. You know, whipping a little bit of agglomerated powder or spray dried powder into a bucket of hummus literally takes a few seconds, and then you've got a CBD infused product. And then we also manufacture an agglomerated product, which is incredibly fast hydrating, mostly intended for stick pack markets. But we'll do a demo of both the liquid and the powder at the very end. So consumer benefits associated with SōRSE. First and foremost, safe ingredients, enjoyable and consistent sensory experience, and then accurate dosing and label claims. These are things that we think are going to be incredibly, incredibly important, not only to the regulatory bodies, but also to the consumers at whole. And I will say thank you. Hopefully, we've gotten a whole bunch of questions. Before we get into the questions, I will try and do one of the demos. So hopefully this works. It's always fun. This is the liquid SōRSE. So I've got, a glass of water. If this is your bright tank, all you have to do is add a little bit of the SōRSE emulsion, gentle agitation, and you're done. So it doesn't get actually easier than that to make a beverage. And that product will be stable for, in many cases, 9 to 12 months. The powder, which is the really fun one, is if you've got a stick pack, and most of you are familiar with Crystal Light, sometimes you have to add that in. They're the market leader, but you add it in and you've got to shake and shake and shake and shake. But we've designed the tech so it'll sit for a second. It almost goes into solution right away. And you're done. So CBD beverage on the go. It doesn't get any better than that or easier than that. So I think we'll turn it over to Diana and we'll hit the Q&A.
For those of you who have never seen Michael Flemmens at a show, that is his favorite product to demo. His face kind of lights up, so I'm glad that we still get that opportunity virtually. We did have a couple questions come in here, so I'm just going to start off with this one, which is actually one of our most frequently asked questions. What areas in food and bev do you feel are untapped in terms of market opportunity?
Yeah, those are great questions. We get them quite often, and I think one of them maybe touched on with like the dips for the health and wellness. We don't see it could be, it doesn't even necessarily have to be healthy. It could be a cheese spread for the keto folks. But we don't see a lot of traction in the dip market mix. That's an underserved, or at least apparently underserved market to date. The other one that we gravitate a lot to is there's a lot of anecdotal evidence and that CBD and other cannabinoids pre and post exercise are incredibly beneficial. Post exercise is for anti-inflammatory effects. So you'll have people that'll go hit a pretty heavy leg day and take a good dose of CBD with their protein shake after the gym, and they will say that they weren't as sore or as stiff the next morning. And folks that are taking beforehand have a much more enjoyable or pleasant workout experience. And in many cases, they can actually work out a little bit more than they used to. So having either a powder format as included into a protein powder that you can mix yourself, or whether it's an RTD protein beverage, post-workout protein beverage, those are some really great, at least in my opinion, untapped market verticals.
Excellent. I know I'm personally waiting for my protein bar to have CBD in it. It would really just cut a step out of my daily routine. So if anyone's doing protein bars, that's my pitch right there. We had a couple other questions. We see a lot of different products on the market with varying dosages, whether it's an edible or a beverage. Do you have a specific, what are we seeing the most of from clients? Are they looking for 20 milligram products or high dosage, or are they starting with the micro dose at 5 milligrams per serving?
Yeah, it's a great question. Interesting. I think there's like two paradigms. So if we bifurcate that a little bit, there is some consumers, the curious consumers, are hesitant many times to jump into a heavy dose. So we see people as they enter the marketplace sometimes will gravitate and look for a lower dose product. In some cases, they'll buy a 20 milligram beverage and then only drink half because they're waiting to see what happens. And so we do see a good opportunity for development companies to have an introductory dosage. So maybe a lower dose product that a consumer could try and then walk them up. We see mostly that 15 to 25 milligram dosage tends to be the lion's share of the market. The other thing you want to pay attention to is you want to make sure you do really good marketplace research and know what products are out there, how many milligrams they're containing, and what their price point is. Because a lot of consumers are becoming savvy. They know that if $5 for 20 milligrams and $5 for 15 milligrams, they'll gravitate to the $5 for more. So the other caveat is maybe you could hook the consumer or the 15 milligram if you charge $4, and how that plays into your company's financials. That you'll have to calculate that. But it really go back to what are the consumers looking for, and as far as dosage, and how do I get people introduced to my product and then continue on. And then as consumers know the marketplace, am I properly positioning my product and its price point?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you pointed out that the consumer is becoming a little bit more educated in that space, because they now know, it's becoming a more saturated market. They're a little bit more familiar with the products out there. And it really does depend on what their lifestyle is, who your target consumer is. I think that's an important step whenever you're conceptualizing a product. So I'm glad that you touched on that. We had a question about how we work with our clients in terms of when we're working with a new client that's maybe in the product formulation phase. How do we work with them in terms of integrating SōRSE as the ingredient and determining the right point for infusion?
Yeah, good question. So SōRSE has taken our approach to business is there isn't a single approach to business. Just like we don't make one product, we don't have one approach with customers. We have a very widely varied customer base. We have folks that are incredibly sophisticated, familiar with beverage development, product development, manufacturing, and they essentially just need a raw material supplier. So in that capacity, we educate them on the product, a little bit of education on how to use it, and off to the races. On the other end of the spectrum, we have people that are like, I want to start a CBD beverage company, and I never done anything like this in my entire life. So all the way from, product design, flavor development, packaging, labeling, we can help on just about every front. We have probably 200 plus years of food, beverage, development expertise in the lab. Probably a lot more than that now, but yeah, we can help as much or as little as necessary.
Excellent. This is definitely one of our #1 questions we've actually presented on a few times, including the last BevNET where we presented a breakout session. How important is the supplier of the raw ingredients that we're converting into SōRSE? And what are the top 3 questions that we should be asking when evaluating a supplier?
Yeah. So for us, cannabis supply is likely next to the manufacturing is one of the most critical attributes. So making sure that our suppliers can deliver a consistent product and more importantly, a safe product and a compliant product is the #1 concern for SōRSE for raw material streams. Everybody says that they produce everything in incredibly high quality, but our experience is showing otherwise. Some people just don't know what they don't know yet. And it's until you ask the question that you find out that they don't know. I'll spare the name, but one extractor, when I asked to see their HACCP plan, they asked, what's a HACCP? And that was time to get up and leave. There's certain criteria that you really have to, and if you want to participate in the food and bev space, you have to understand that. Not necessarily the same exact requirements or level of requirements in the supplement space, but we would rather shoot for a high bar and be able to use one supplier to do both supplement and food. And we don't have one supplier, we have multiple suppliers. Each supplier, whether through genetics or extraction process, presents sometimes our unique material, whether it's terpene rich or non-terpene rich, whether it's full spectrum or isolate. There are certain suppliers that we prefer for certain products, and we think that certain suppliers are much better at certain product lines than others. So we don't single source. It's also not a good idea to not have manufacturing or supply redundancy. The last thing you want to do is spend time, money, and resources to develop a beverage line and then find out that your CBD supplier that's the only place you can get it. Make sure you qualify another CBD supply house, because God forbid there's a catastrophic event. You want to be able to have redundancy. And the same thing goes from your emulsion supplier. If they don't have redundancy, manufacturing redundancy, if they don't have supply redundancy, run for the hills. Because the last thing you want to do is develop and market a product and then find out that there was an earthquake or a wildfire or corona, and we can't have employees come into the building to manufacture a product. You'll be up the creek. So you really, really want to make sure that you've got good redundancy, that you really vet your supplies.
Kind of going off that, I guess, kind of piggybacking, what kind of documentation should we be, looking for that you need to, in order to vet your supplier?
Yeah, there's a laundry list of materials to go through. Some of it depends on your application. If you're not interested or concerned about manufacturing a kosher compliant material, then you don't need to ask them to see their kosher cert. But if you do intend to do a kosher product, then ask for the kosher certs. HACCP plans, cleaning validations, manufacturing plans, CGMP. There's literally an entire laundry list of things that you should look for. Make sure you get C of A's with products. There's just so many things that, in the absence of having a lot of predicate experience in the food and beverage space, if you don't have it, I would strongly advocate that you make sure that you either work with a consultant or work with some other company that has the ability to help guide you. It comes back to, again, it's you don't know what you don't know. And with so many regulations and conditions, you know, the rules of manufacturing a product in one state sometimes can differ between states. You know, California is notorious for having its own set of regulations. Certain supply streams or routes to market, like take the Whole Foods list. You know, there's a reason that Coke and Pepsi aren't in Whole Foods. There's certain materials of construction that they don't approve for Whole Foods or are to one. You know, each one of these different streams, either go-to-market streams, has different requirements, and you really have to know where you're going to go and how you're going to get there.
Okay, great. Thank you for going into depth there. We're going back to the product development side here, talking a little bit more about flavor control. When it comes to broad spectrum and isolate, I guess the question really here is, how easy is it to mask these flavors? Are you able to just use natural flavoring, or do you need to add additional sugars or anything like that?
Yeah, the short answer is it's pretty easy. The long answer is it's a complicated mess to get there. There are mechanisms and processes that you can use to help mitigate aroma. I know there's a lot of materials in the market that are sold as bitter blockers. We tend not to use those. We prefer to not have an additional material on the label deck. So if we can get at the reduction of sensory through formulation and process, that's our desired approach. It doesn't always work. In some rare instances, we may leverage some bitter blockers or some masking agents. There is a unique approach through the formulation of the input streams that you can do to help mitigate some of the sensory aromas, by still hitting like all of your cannabinoid assays. So there's literally a lot of different avenues and approaches. It comes back to it's not a one-trick pony. Each customer is going to have potentially a unique set of requirements. So we try and best position ourselves to hit all those requirements.
Excellent. Thanks, Michael. I have one last question for you, and this one is a little bit more of an op-ed for you, so we'll be looking for your opinion here. If you're thinking about getting into the space or adding CBD to a product line, what are the top 3 questions you should be asking yourself when analyzing the marketplace or reviewing, your consumer target audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't know how familiar people are with the concept, but there's an interesting product development concept called blue ocean. Blue ocean versus red ocean. Red ocean is where you're trying to introduce a product which is essentially a Me Too product. You haven't found the way of differentiation, either through some untapped attribute or a novel delivery system. Blue ocean, so the best example of like a really old blue ocean, back at the turn of the century, there were 30 or 40 different car manufacturers in the United States, and they were all trying to appeal to the very wealthy people and build the most luxurious cars that you can imagine. And along comes Henry Ford. And he's like, you get one car, you get one color, and it was intended for a mass market. So his spin on that marketing was to do something different than anyone else in the space and have some attributes that none of the other competitors have. It's much easier said than done. Apple's been doing it for a long time. Yellowtail Wine's done it. Southwest Airlines has sort of shifted the paradigm. So when you look at these classic examples, like go through some of these companies, see what they've done to be successful and how they've differentiated themselves in the marketplace. You don't want to end up competing on price. You don't want to end up competing, you make a cheaper product for a lower price and you're positioned as a low cost provider. CBD is not a low cost material. The consumers think about Starbucks. No one knee jerks at paying what you pay for a cup of Starbucks coffee. so far in the marketplace, I haven't seen anyone knee jerk at the cost of CBD, much like protein shakes. That market really hasn't seen a huge degree of price erosion over time. But it's really about how do you differentiate yourself, whether it could be through branding or product type or flavor concept, or but you really want to make a unique product, because the market will start to get very, very saturated very quickly. That being said, you know, there's you go down the soda aisle in the grocery store, there's Coke and Pepsi dominate, but there's still plenty of other choices out there, and those companies make a really, really good business out of being a smaller player to the big guys.
This is actually just my question. Do you have a particular product that's currently on the market that you would like to see CBD in?
Oh yeah, if I could get an RTD protein beverage, it's a grab and go, like done, I'd buy in it.
Okay. Well, that's pretty much all we have for today. Thank you guys all for wrapping up, for joining us today. If you guys have additional questions, feel free to visit the SōRSE Technology booth or message some of our team on staff directly. We look forward to hearing from you, and enjoy the rest of the show.